What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and this is another Smashing Pumpkins video. We're going to be reviewing Zeitgeist in this video. So we've done every Smashing Pumpkins album up to this point. We even did Zwan's Mary, the Star of the Sea. So we did that 2 weeks ago. Time to jump back in to the Smashing Pumpkins officially in Zeitgeist. So we're going to be doing the same thing that we've been doing for all the other albums, and like I said, we've done every single album, all the 90 Smashing Pumpkins albums, so make sure you check out our channel if you missed any of those and you're watching this and you haven't watched those. Make sure you check that out. At this point, they've been on tour for a while. That's really, really awesome. We're getting close to when I'm actually going to go see them live, which is very, very cool, and I'll have a video up. I think the next video I do will be the review of them live. I kind of want to give my impressions of seeing them actually live and what they've been able to put on. And I'm recording this pretty early, so I don't know what the actual tour looks like, but I hope it's pretty darn awesome. So we're going to do the same thing we've done with all the other albums. I want to talk about the history of Zeitgeist. I want to talk about some of the drama and everything that kind of occurred during this era. And I want to talk about every single song. There's no hiding it. This album was very much polarized when it first came out. Not a lot of people liked this album. This album was released on July 10th, 2007, so actually we just went by its birthday. And in terms of my time period, the album's anniversary is actually in 2 days away. I'm recording this on July 8th, so I'm 2 days before its 11th year birthday, so that's really cool. And here's what I'll say. I've listened to it multiple times now. I've listened to all the songs multiple times, and I like it. I understand the criticisms with it. I completely do. But at the same time, this is not a bad album. It's probably a bad Smashing Pumpkins album, but it's not a bad album. So again, released in 2007, this was obviously right after Billy Corgan did Zwan and then did The Future Embrace, so his solo project. He wanted the band back together. So what did he do? He got Jimmy Chamberlin. That's pretty much all he got back. He's never even said, and I would like to hear this from James, who's back in the band now. When this happened back in the day, there were conflicting stories that Billy actually reached out to Darcy and James and said, "You want back in?" and they continuously said no. And then from the other side of things, they said that he never said something like that. So I would like to know what the true story of that is. I don't think they'll ever say, because they're not going to get into that, especially with James back in the band. But whether or not they actually tried, it didn't happen. It was only 2/4 of the original Smashing Pumpkins. The rest was replaced with Jeff Schroeder as the other guitar player, who is a fantastic guitar player, and I believe he was actually a music teacher in a college when Billy Corgan kind of plucked him out of that. That's really cool, and he's always been a fantastic guitar player. He's stuck around for 11 years, and that's really, really cool. Now, this wasn't recorded with them, and I'll get into the recording a little bit later for this history part, and also Ginger on the bass, kind of continuing the female-led bass part, so that's kind of cool too. But when it came to the actual recording, it was only Billy Corgan and Jimmy Chamberlin. They recorded it all by themselves. They were their own producers, and Jimmy Chamberlin was actually a producer on the album as well. But they did get help, and it took a while for them to get help because their vision for the album did not jive with a lot of companies. Actually, funny enough, I never knew this, the people that were kind of repping them or people that were talking to them actually wanted them to get American Idiot, Green Day's American Idiot's producer, to help them. And that's really cool because Green Day is my second favorite band behind the Smashing Pumpkins. And they rejected that. They didn't want that. Because it was kind of just to capitalize off the success of American Idiot. They did some things very, very differently here. They recorded, I think, on the same track as the 1995 Melancholy album, but it was all live recordings. And the way they handled the actual mixing, which is a huge problem in Zeitgeist, was there really weren't any levers and switches in terms of, well, let's put this at 68 or let's put this at 52 or whatever, and kind of moving it back and forth. It was either you're on, and that's what the producer, whoever, I don't remember his name, that's what he actually said, is it was either on or off. All these sounds, all these mixings were either on or they were off. They weren't there wasn't a bar measuring them. And at the end of the day, I do think that hurts this album tremendously. The mixing is the biggest problem here, I think, because the album and the songs have a lot of emotion, have a lot of what we know of the Smashing Pumpkins, and have a lot of what we will future see from them. And I'm going to get into that when we go into the songs. But what I will say is this, the album, I personally enjoy it. There are some songs that just aren't up to snuff. There's some songs that I can just skip by, but there are some pretty rock songs on here. And at the end of the day, that's what they wanted to do. If you're going to go after them for anything, Billy Corgan especially for anything, go after the vision of what Zeitgeist actually was. Zeitgeist was built by those two, Jimmy Chamberlain and Billy Corgan, to be a modern-day rock album to get new people in and to bring back the old people, but just a generic rock album. And they even said that that was their goal. They didn't want to get artsy. They didn't want to, do the things they did with Melancholy, with Adore. Obviously, Adore is super like that. And not necessarily artsy. I'd argue Machina and Machina 2, insanely artsy, especially with that the back half and all of Machina 2 is pretty much artsy as well. But they didn't want to do that. They didn't really want to scare anybody off. They wanted to make an album that anybody could just listen to, just a modern day rock album. And so you can get mad at them for that vision, but to be honest, they definitely accomplished that. This album is that. There are so many guitars. The drums are amazing. Billy Corgan's voice is super, super emotional. They made this is one of the heaviest, I think it is, the heaviest Smashing Pumpkins album they ever made. I mean, it's layered with guitars, it's layered with heavy guitars. There are some songs that definitely punch you, not in the same way as an Everlasting Gaze and the heavier songs that we would think from the 90s Smashing Pumpkins, but what they set out to do, they did accomplish. It's just, it wasn't necessarily what we needed and wanted, and I don't know if that still haunts them to this day. The album came out and it sold relatively well. It actually sold extremely well the first couple weeks, and then it just trailed off and did pretty poorly overall. And obviously, people just didn't like it. And Billy Corgan's even gone, a quote from him has been I think people expected it to be this grand thing. And a band that hasn't played together for 7 years, to just be able to do that is hard. And I will give him that because, firstly, it was only half the band. It's him and Jimmy, that's it. And secondly, he had been doing other stuff. Zwan doesn't necessarily sound like Zeitgeist. It does have a lot of themes, and you can hear a lot of those sounds, and especially when you listen to Zwan, you can hear, oh, this is kind of like that step right before Zeitgeist. You can hear that. But it's not Zeitgeist, and it's not the Smashing Pumpkins. The Future Embrace, I mean, that's a very artsy, different in terms of sound. Not a lot of guitars, not a lot of drums, just very focused on the music and focused on Billy Corgan. That is not the Smashing Pumpkins. And so to do that, and then to bring it all back together, and decide what do we want to do for this new album, this modern day album, and they didn't want to offend anybody with their message, like a political message, although it is somewhat about politics and the way that the world was in 2007. They didn't want to scare anybody off, so they didn't want to go too artsy, but they didn't also want to force their opinions on people. And I feel like that's a safe approach, and I feel like their decision to go the rock route was a safe approach, and it worked in some ways and it didn't work in others. The album overall is a little inconsistent with just everything. And even the songs are inconsistent at times. And I think that's just what you get. Also, like I said, the way they recorded this, the way they recorded it live, doesn't necessarily translate. Having all these effects on and having multiple layers of Billy Corgan's voice on every single song, and that's what they did, it wasn't a wise move, and they've toned it down. You can hear it in Oceania, and you can hear it in Monuments. They toned it down. They tried to do something with Zeitgeist, and I can appreciate it. I don't not like Zeitgeist. In fact, there's some of these songs midway, end of the album, I had never listened to before this. I had only listened to about half of Zeitgeist in the past, and I've been a Smashing Pumpkins fan for 6 years, and I've only ever listened to half these songs. I didn't really want to listen to the other half because I kind of had in my mind that they just weren't that good. But I've listened to them, and I actually really love some of these songs. There's some really good songs here. They also just have some inconsistent parts to them. So none of these songs are necessarily perfect. None of them are the best material they've ever made, but they do rock. I mean, I like the guitars in a lot of these songs. I love the drums. Billy Corgan's voice, I love his voice. I don't like how they used it here. Some songs it works really, really well. Some songs I think it's just a little too overkill. And some songs, the more experimental songs, the songs that they sound like they're mixing Future Embrace with Smashing Pumpkins, I don't think necessarily pull it off. So overall, this album is whatever you want to think about it going in. But when you listen to it, I think you just have to have the right expectations for this album. And, it's kind of just, it happened. It happened. They played some of the songs. They really don't play a lot of the songs from this over the past couple tours that they've done. So it is kind of been casted off, but it's still an important part of Smashing Pumpkins history. I mean, they came back, and then after this, they kind of did some weird stuff with the Teardrops by Kaleidoscope and Oceania and that kind of stuff, which we'll talk about next time. But that was some weird stuff that they started to go into after Zeitgeist. It didn't, I think, work out the way they lost Ginger relatively soon. She had a child, so she left the band. They also had a piano player that they just dropped, and then things changed. They got a new drummer when Jimmy Chamberlin left. So after this album, the band again completely changes to basically just Billy Corgan is the Smashing Pumpkins, and it's been that way for 2 albums, and really for 10 years, from 2008, let's say, to right now, it's been just Billy Corgan because everybody else is gone. So that's why what's happening right now is so special, because we didn't really have that in 2007 with Zeitgeist, and we also haven't had it really since 2000 with James, and you could even argue, they haven't been fully together, other than the Arising tour, but on an album, they haven't been together since Melancholy, because Adore didn't have Jimmy. So it's a fascinating story. There's a lot that happened during this time, but relatively simple mechanics and how it actually worked. I mean, Billy Corgan did all the guitar parts himself, did all the bass parts. Jimmy Chamberlin did all the drum parts. We'll talk about what he did for United States, which I think is a cool story and a cool song. And that was pretty much it. Then they got the rest of the band. So this album was completely created by 2 people, which is not that much different than the past albums, especially early, like Gish, Siamese Dream. Siamese Dream was basically just made by those 2, and also Butch Vig. So, we get some comparisons there, but at the same time, this didn't exactly work the same way. So, let's go through every single song, starting with Doomsday Clock. This song, I think, gets you right into what this album is going to sound like, and it's kind of off-putting because it's very dark. It's got some heavy guitars, and I will say, it starts out in that strong kind of way where it is heavy. It's not a metal album, but it's like a heavy rock album, and you really start to hear that with this song. What I will say is it really does kick off immediately the problems this album has with his voice, because you hear the guitars, and they sound, kind of like gloomy and dark and heavy, which I like. The guitars in this are good. The drums are good. You start to hear some weird mechanics all of a sudden, though, and then his voice comes in, and you realize that, oh, his voice is up here, and all the instruments are down here, and you can't even see my hand. That's how low they were. And that's how this album is, and you get hit right away with that in Doomsday Clock, and towards the middle and the end of the song, where it's just very heavily his voice. I don't hate his voice. I've never hated his voice. I've always loved his voice, but it's just way too high on this song. Then we get 7 Shades of Black, which is the next song, which is a more faster-paced, heavy, still, I'd say it's around the same kind of heavy nature as Doomsday Clock, but again, it's got the nice drums, it's got some nice guitar work, it's faster than Doomsday Clock in a lot of ways, but again, his voice is just higher than it, and I don't know, it doesn't necessarily work. This song is pretty much just a song you can skip over. You don't need to hear the song. It is a faster paced song, that's true, and so it does actually go by rather fast. And that's another thing with this album. A lot of these songs are pretty long, and even the songs I truly like later on the album, I feel like just stick around for too long. And I feel like if you cut off like a minute from each of the last 6 songs, you would have a much better album. But I just feel like they kind of linger. I'll say in the beginning of the album, you don't necessarily get that with those 2 first songs. Now, I will say the next song, Bleeding the Orchid, is a really good song. This is a song that I had listened to before, like when I just had listened to Smashing Pumpkins. This is a nice song. I like. It's dark. It's dark. It's got his voice, and his voice definitely is over the guitars, especially when it gets into the more guitar solo towards the end, and then it kind of builds back up and has the guitar parts with him singing. I mean, there is a clear he's up here and everything else is down there, but in terms of how the actual song works, it's really good. And what I'll also say about 7 Shades of Black is this is when you hear 15 versions of his voice, so that's kind of off-putting. Just want to throw that back out there. But I will say, with this song, I do generally like Bleeding the Orchid, and I like the guitar parts, I like the drums, I like his voice. This used to be one of my favorite songs of the album. I actually think some of the songs I've recently listened to on this album are better, but this is definitely a good song. Then we have That's the Way, and then in parentheses, My Love Is. This song is very good. This is, I think, probably the first song I listened to on Zeitgeist, and I loved it. I still love it. I think it's my favorite song on this. It's a more calmed down song on this album. It's not as heavy. It's still kind of emotional, and it still has feelings to it, and it's still got the guitar. It's still got him singing. It's still got Jimmy's drumming, but it's nicer. It doesn't have I think, as many layers of his voice. And this is a song I really, really like hearing live, too. Here's what I'll say, though. A lot of these songs do translate very, very well live. Even songs that sound very much overproduced, like later on, like Bring On the Light, those songs work really, really well live that I wouldn't have thought would, but they actually do. But that's the way. This is one of my favorite songs. The music video is kind of strange. I don't necessarily like the music video, but overall, this is a song I can just listen to. It's kind of calming. It's got some really nice parts. I like all of it. His voice isn't too overpowering, and that's really good. Which then goes to Tarantula, which couldn't have been a more 180 from That's the Way. This song was very, very dividing amongst fans. And even me listening to it, sometimes I'll absolutely love it, and sometimes it's like, okay, this doesn't need to happen. I have never heard so many guitars in a song than this. The music video even, there are so many guitar players. There's just like that one big overweight guy that's like to his right the whole time. Who are these people? That's just a weird music video overall with, you know, kind of him in his suit and all that stuff. But holy God, there are some guitars going on in the song. Now, what I will say is I think it works overall, but it's just so highly produced without really being produced, because there's just like, I think they even said once, like 50, is it 50 plus guitar layers on this song? It's too much. It's too much, but what I will say, I'll give them credit for, is he's really good at playing the guitar. And I've always thought that, and this album, listening to this album, especially the songs I'd never heard before, I was missing out on some really good guitar parts, because he knows how to play the guitar and he knows how to make some really nice solos, some really nice melodies. He does it again where he matches his voice later on in the album, where he matches his voice with the guitar, which again, every single video I say it, I really, really love that, and that's never changed. He's always done that. I think he always will. Tarantula has some really amazing guitar parts by everybody. Everybody playing it live, everybody playing, just Billy Corgan playing all those guitars. And they sound like they work, but there's just too many. And it's just too loud. And there's just too much stuff going on in that song. And again, I can sometimes listen to it and be like, okay, I can listen to this. I can listen to it again too. And sometimes it's like, okay, you guys need to just put the brakes on. I don't know who told you can have this many guitars in a song, but you need to back off. And they didn't. And I think that song sometimes suffers from it. And then we get to Stars after, and Stars is a lot like That's the Way in a different way, because again, it's a little bit slower, but it's talking about them. I kind of like that. I kind of like, it's not really like a gloating thing, but he is talking about like the band and kind of himself in terms of we are stars, we are. I like that, and the song never necessarily picks up that much. I mean, it does when it goes into like the chorus, it does change a little bit, but the song isn't really fast-paced. It doesn't do anything too crazy. It kind of stays where it is. It's got some really nice guitar parts to it, some really nice just single notes, but they're quiet. They're really quiet, and I like that because we had just listened to Tarantula right after it. So I think overall this song works really well. And then we get to the big one in this album, is United States. I really like United States. I think United States is a very polarizing, again, song, but I love the story behind it. It's almost 10 minutes long, I believe, and Jimmy Chamberlin played it all in one take. One take, he played the entire thing. I think the first take, too, so that's incredible. And what I like about this song is it does show off how good his drumming is, because he keeps it going throughout this entire album. Now, the guitars definitely take a lot of this album, but that's just because there's like 5,000 of them in the album. It's not necessarily because they're always the best part of the songs, even though sometimes they are, but Jimmy Chamberlin's drumming is just so consistently amazing throughout the entire album. And this is the song that he really gets to shine. He really plays the drums very well in this, and just keeps a really nice beat, and not really a beat because it changes quite often, right? But I really like this. I like Billy Corgan's voice in it. I like that it's spaced out. I like there's kind of like long pauses of very little things happening. But at the end of the day, especially like towards the end of the song where it really starts to pick up and it really starts to get heavier, especially with the guitar chords, along with the drumming, along with Billy's voice kind of coming back in, very hard hitting. This is a song I think really works. And when Jimmy Chamberlin came back for the 2015-2016 tour, which the Manson one, they would play that song. Kind of, I think, just to show off how good he is. And I understand that. I hope they do something like that now. I think the best song probably to do that would be Cash Car Star. I think that would be the best song from the 2000 earlier Smashing Pumpkins that shows just how good of a drummer he is. I think that's the perfect song. If they were doing current songs as well during this tour, And by the way, again, I'm recording this super early, so I don't know if they're playing that song. That would be my choice for a song I'd want to see on it. But if they were doing like recent songs, I think United States would be on it for sure, because I think it really, and he can just do his own drum solo, which they have had him do in the past. So I really, really like this song overall. It's very, very long. You have to stay connected to it. I don't necessarily think it does a great job at grabbing you and holding you. You have to give the song a little bit. You have to actually put yourself out there and then let it grab you. And once it does, I think it does a really good job, especially the second half of the song. Never Lost is next. Now, Never Lost is an interesting song because in a way it reminds me of Try, Try, Try in terms of like how it opens, but it's slow. It is kind of like quiet. It's more emotional. This song has, I feel like, just an emotional take on it. But then once it starts to get towards the guitar parts, once it actually gets into the more solo heavy parts, this song reminds me super heavily of the guitars we're going to start hearing on Oceania, specifically in the song Oceania. It's got the same kind of effects going on. It sounds like it's in the same like 5-6 note structure as Oceania. Like it sounds like they're playing the same kind of notes. And I really like that. I really do. And when I was listening to it, I was trying to think what does this sound like to me? And it sounds exactly like Oceania. The guitar parts, the singing and everything. This is a nice song. I can listen to the song, but this isn't a song that I need to listen to, and I can skip by. But overall, I mean, this is a song that I've never heard before besides when I started listening to this album, and I think it's a above average song, a song that I can say like I legitimately do like. And then we get the next two, which I love. I think they're my two favorite songs, maybe just because I've just recently started listening to them, but they're right up there with That's the Way and any other song that I think is up there, which is really That's the Way and probably Bleeding the Orchid, is Bring On the Light, which I'll say in the beginning of this song, kind of when he's like whispering in his voice, it's weird, it's kind of off-putting, it's kind of like upsetting, but once it gets to the song, once it hits you with the guitar part, my God, this song rocks. This song is heavy, it's loud, it's got some amazing guitar solo work, it's got some great guitar work in general, and I like his voice. I like how his voice mimics the guitar. I like how they kind of work together. And although the guitar is very, very powerful and there's a lot going on, it doesn't sound too overbearing. It works rather well. It works just to the point where, like, if it was a little bit more, it would be too much. And I tried to find this song live because I was like, I wonder if they've ever played this live, and I wonder how it sounds. And it sounds identical, but like better because it's live. So I was like, yeah, this song actually translates very, very well to a live stage. Now, they only played it back in 2007, but I would like to see this song come back one day because this is a rock song, heavy. This is kind of that thing. It's a generic, let's play some really nice guitar parts, let's have it match my voice, let's have it not be too like crazy, and let's stay kind of in our lane. And this is the song I think gets you there. Same thing with Come On Let's Go, the next song. Now this song I truly like as well. Maybe just as much, but I think slightly less, to be honest. What I'll say about this one is I feel like there's just lesser good parts in this song, but this song has my favorite aspects, like I've been saying, of the Smashing Pumpkins, in terms of the song matches his voice. Oftentimes, he'll play notes that match literally how he's singing. So I definitely like that. And again, this has some really, really nice guitar parts too. And it doesn't have some nice guitar parts, it also, and when I say nice, I'm kind of talking about like the solo aspect, but it also has the heavier stuff. It has parts where he's not singing, and it's just the chords going on, the kind of like heavy one-note E string chords that I really, really like. You know, they've done that throughout their entire career, and you hear that again here, and I definitely like it. These are two of my favorite songs on this album, and two of my favorite songs by them from 2007 on. I'd say it's some of their better work, just personally. And then we get to the last two, Forgotten Country and Pomp and Circumstances. And Forgotten Country is a very, very interesting song because it's very slow, it's very, very different. It relies more on just weird noises than actual guitar and drums. This song, in a nutshell, is The Future Embrace. If you were to go and listen to The Future Embrace just in general, I swear you would probably hear the exact same sounds from like a sound machine again on this song. And I like it, actually. What I will say, though, is it doesn't fit this album at all. I feel like, in a way, they lied when they said we were going for a generic rock album, because I feel like these last two songs are not that. I feel like they were him trying to be kind of himself, just kind of being artsy and do something a little bit different, because Forgotten Country is not the same sound as the rest of it. There's not multiple layers of guitars. There's not really multiple layers of his voice. And the sound overall, literally the sound you hear, sounds very, very much more of The Future Embrace, which is way more artsy, way more like sound-oriented than anything we've ever heard on the Smashing Pumpkins. and they just don't sound anything alike. And if you were to take this song out of this album and listen to it, you may not even know that it's a Smashing Pumpkins song. I actually think you wouldn't, because it just sounds so different. So I feel like the song is misplaced. I like the song, but I feel like it doesn't belong on here. And Pomp and Circumstances isn't the greatest song. I think once it gets again to the guitar parts, kind of the last 2-3 minutes of the song, it does do a much better job, and it sounds again very, very much like the guitar sounds that we hear on Oceania. Overall, kind of a pretty skippable song, but I do like that. What I will say is, again, these last like 5-6 songs definitely drag. Like from Never Lost on, I feel like a lot of these songs can just have a minute shaved. Never Lost, I feel like I have like a minute shaved off of it. Forgotten Country, easily a minute. Pomp and Circumstances, like a whole minute. And I feel like that would just make the songs better overall, but he is more into longer songs. I actually like that. I just definitely feel like here it doesn't work on this album as well as it's worked in the past. I just feel like they're dragging, trying to make longer songs and not kind of like letting the music, just because it's good, make it a longer song. They're kind of just doing it to do it. So overall, that's Zeitgeist. What an album. What a freaking album. So in 2 weeks, we're going to be reviewing Oceania. I'm excited. I've loved Oceania from the first time I listened to that album. I think it's their best album of this modern day. I also think it's a better album than even some of the 90s albums. I truly believe that. It's got some amazing, amazing songs that I'll talk about when we do that. So in 2 weeks, we will do that, or in 4 weeks, we'll do that, because in 2 weeks, I may be reviewing them live. So those are the two next things. We'll be reviewing Oceania, and we'll be reviewing their actual live tour. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you on the next video.